Hey guys, tonight we're going to step barefoot into the humid jungles of ancient Mesoamerica, where the stars hang low and the air smells like wetter than roasted maize. You're not exactly dressed for the occasion, your modern sneakers wouldn't last 10 minutes here, but don't worry. The Mayan nobles have extended an invitation to their gathering. Lucky you, although, between us, you might not survive your first sip of what they're serving. Spoiler, it's not hot chocolate the way you know it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me what city you're listening from and the time on your clock right now. It's always fun to see where and when we meet across this sleepy timeline. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself walking into a torchlit courtyard. The walls are covered in glyphs that look like they're gossiping about things you can't quite read. And at the center sits a long wooden table. On it are bowls of something thick, dark, and steaming. The nobles sit around in elaborate feather headdresses, jade jewelry glittering in the firelight, and they look at you as if you've just been chosen to experience their most treasured drink. The first thing that strikes you is how different this chocolate looks from the sweet bars at the gas station back home. Here, cacao isn't candy, it's liquid, foamy, bitter, and, dare we say, intimidating. The Mayan world treated cacao as more than food. It was status, currency, and ritual all at once. To be offered a bowl wasn't just hospitality, it was an initiation. You lift the bowl carefully, trying not to spill. The surface froths with bubbles, whipped up by pouring the liquid back and forth from one vessel to another, a process that makes the drink look more like a potion than a snack. And maybe that's exactly what it is, a potion for the body, the spirit, and the social ladder. You can almost hear the unspoken rule humming in the air if you're drinking this. You're among the elite. Your nose catches something unexpected. It's not just roasted cacao beans. There's a sharp edge in the aroma, something fiery hiding under the bitterness. And just as you wonder, a nobleman gestures with a grin. Drink. You take a cautious sip. It's rich, yes, but suddenly there's heat, a sting on your tongue, a burn in the back of your throat. This is not comfort food, it's a challenge. The Mayans mix ground chili peppers into their cacao, creating a drink that's more like liquid lightning. You cough lightly, and the nobles chuckle. To them, your reaction confirms what they already know. This is not a drink for the uninitiated. But here's the strange part, you start to feel awake. The bitterness of the cacao sharpens your senses, while the chili jolts you with its spice. Historians still debate whether the Mayans considered it a stimulant, a medicine, or simply a status flex. Probably all three. One thing is certain, you're not drinking for taste, you're drinking for meaning. Imagine it. Each bowl you lift is layered with symbols. The cacao tree itself was considered divine. It's been sometimes painted in murals as gifts from the gods. To consume it was to participate in something cosmic. Yet here you are, a humble traveler, trying not to choke on history. The laughter softens, and one of the nobles leans in, his jade necklace clinking. He tells you, in his quiet but commanding tone, that cacao is life, it's wealth, it's sacred, and if you ever doubt its importance, just remember gold might look nice, but you can't drink gold. As the torches flicker and the night deepens, you begin to understand tonight isn't about feasting on food you recognize. It's about being led into a secret world where every sip ties you tighter to the society that brewed it. The chili isn't there to make it easy, it's there to remind you that luxury can sting, and that the best things in life are often the ones you need to grow into. The aftertaste still lingers on your tongue, sharp, smoky, a little bit like you just licked the inside of a fireplace. And yet, oddly enough, you don't hate it. You lean back on the carved wooden bench, trying to look casual, but your eyes are darting to every bowl on the table. Everyone else seems to sip the drink without flinching, as if the spice is no more surprising than a glass of water. That's when it hits you. This isn't the chocolate you know. It isn't meant to be sweet at all. It's meant to be serious. In the Mayan world, cacao wasn't sugar-coated or turned into dessert bars. Nope, it was ground from roasted beans, mixed with water, rolled into foam, and then blended with extras like chili or maize flour. If you walked in here expecting hot cocoa with marshmallows, well, you might as well ask the nobles if they'd like a pumpkin spice latte. The answer would be an unamused stare. What you're drinking is called xocolotl, which literally means bitter water. Not the most glamorous name, but it's honest advertising. And bitter water was earthy, strong, and unmistakably grown up. To the Mayans, this bitterness was the point. It was a reminder of life's complexity kind of thing that made you feel both grounded and alert. Some anthropologists suggest that this taste, so far from sweetness, was what gave cacao its gravitas. Sweetness was for children. Bitterness was for rulers, priests, and warriors. You watch a servant pour more of the drink back and forth between two vessels, creating that signature frothy top. The foam wasn't just texture, it was the fancy part, the highlight, the bit you really wanted. Think of it as the latte art of its time, except instead of a leaf or a heart, it's a layer of bubbles announcing your sophistication. Here's where it gets interesting. Scholars today are still debating whether cacao drinks were consumed daily or reserved for special occasions. Some evidence suggests nobles drank it often, even casually. Others argue it was too valuable to waste on anything less than ceremonies. The truth is probably somewhere in between. But either way, you wouldn't find common farmers sipping it on their porch after a long day. And it wasn't just about taste, it was about ingredients. Sugar didn't exist in this part of the world yet, not the way Europeans later used it. So when you think chocolate, don't picture a sweet treat. Instead, think of a cross between strong coffee and a spicy soup. A pick-me-up, yes, but also a statement. You tilt your bowl again, the liquid clings to the sides, thicker than water. Not quite as heavy as porridge. The chili nips at your throat again, reminding you that this isn't comforted culture. Every sip is an education. The nobles glance at you with feigned amusement, as though they can see you puzzling it out. To them, cacao is second nature. To you, it's a revelation, and maybe that's exactly how it was meant to feel. By tasting it, you're not just drinking, you're crossing into their world. One woman at the table, draped in woven cotton and a necklace of jade beads, leans toward you with a smile that is equal parts polite and knowing. She says something you only half understand. Sweetness is for the body. Bitterness is for the soul. You're not sure if it's a proverb or just small talk. But either way, you nod seriously, as if you've just been handed a piece of eternal wisdom. And in a way, you have. The fire crackles in the courtyard, and you're starting to notice that your lips tingle a little with each sip. Not unpleasant, just unexpected. You set the bowl down, hoping your face doesn't give away to much confusion. That's when you realize what's really happening. The Mayans didn't just let chili sneak into their chocolate. They wanted it there. Think about it. When we mix flavors today, we usually aim for balance. Sweet with salty, bitter with creamy. But here, It's all about contrast. Bitter cacao and fiery chili. It's like the culinary version of thunder and lightning. You wonder, aloud, well, maybe just in your head anyone would deliberately make their drink burn. One of the nobles gestures toward a servant, who brings over a tray of small clay jars. Each jar contains a different spice or additive. Chili powder, ground maize, maybe even honey if they're feeling fancy. The noble dips a finger into the chili jar and sprinkles it directly into his bowl, swirling it as casually as you might stir sugar into coffee. He raises an eyebrow at you. Your turn. You hesitate, then mimic him, adding a pinch. The result: fireworks. The bitterness of the cacao deepens, and the chili heat leaps out, grabbing your throat like an old friend who's just too enthusiastic. You cough again, drawing another round of polite laughter from the table. It's official. You're the evening's entertainment. But here's the kicker. Chili wasn't just for taste. It had meaning. Mayan healers believed chili had medicinal properties, as clearing the sinuses, stimulating the body, maybe even warding off unwanted spirits. Paired with cacao, it wasn't just a drink. It was, well, almost a remedy, a boost for both body and soul. And the scholars, still debating. Of course, some argue the chili was symbolic, a spark of life in a drink tied to rituals of fertility and renewal. Others think it was purely practical supposed to cut the bitterness. The truth, as with most things historical, probably both. But one thing's for sure, it left an impression. You can practically feel your heart beating faster, as if you've just downed an ancient version of an energy drink. You glance around the table again. Everyone seemed serene, unbothered by the heat, as if the chili is second nature to them. You, on the other hand, are still fighting the urge to fan your tongue with your hand. A younger noble notices and smirks, leaning towards you with a teasing whisper. Fire keeps you awake. And he's right. Sleep feels impossible now. But not in a bad way. More like your whole body has been nudged into a sharper focus. You can hear the frogs croaking outside the courtyard walls, the flick of the torch flames, even the rustle of feathers on someone's headdress. Suddenly, the world is louder, and all because you added one pinch of chili to a bitter bowl of cacao. You lean back, clutching the bowl a little tighter. For the first time, you understand, this isn't just food, it's philosophy. You've now survived 3 cautious sips without completely embarrassing yourself, which is more than you expected when the evening began. The nobles nod approvingly, and one of them even gestures for a servant to refill your bowl. Apparently, you've earned another round. You try to look dignified as the thick, foamy liquid splashes in, though you're half convinced. Your taste buds are still negotiating a truce. But then you notice something strange. Not everyone in the courtyard is drinking. The servants stand quietly at the edges, hands folded, watching the bowls change hands but never touching them themselves. You glance at them, then at your frothy cup, and it dawns on you this is not an all-inclusive buffet. This drink isn't for everyone. It's a privilege. In Mayan society, cacao was reserved for the upper ranks nobles, priests, rulers, and sometimes warriors. Commoners, not so much. Sure, they could grow cacao, harvest it, maybe even trade it, but drink it the way you're doing now, that would have been stepping over a very invisible but very real line. And here's the funny thing. If you ask someone back then whether chocolate was delicious, they might not even understand the question. Taste wasn't the point. Symbolism was. Drinking cacao meant you belonged to a certain class, that you carried certain responsibilities, that you literally had the god's drink in your hands. It was less about enjoyment more about identity. Historians are still chewing on this one metaphorically, not literally. Some argue cacao was tightly restricted, a badge of nobility. Others believe commoners might have had occasional access, maybe during festivals or through diluted versions of the drink. But most agree it wasn't an everyday treat for just anyone. A noble across the table raises his bowl and nods toward you, as though reminding you of this fact. You're not just sipping a beverage, you're momentarily borrowing someone else's status. You can almost hear the unspoken warning, don't get used to it. The realization changes the taste in your mouth. It's still bitter, still spicy, but now it's heavy. 2. Every swallow carries centuries of hierarchy and ceremony. You feel the weight of it, like you're holding a jade ornament too precious to drop. And yet, there's a thrill. Drinking this doesn't just sting your tongue, it places you in a story bigger than yourself. You glance again at the servants standing silently along the walls, and you know, to them, your simple act of lifting the bowl is a reminder of the gulf between worlds. You set the cup down carefully, almost reverently now. What started as a quirky, bitter drink has become something else entirely, a marker of power, a quiet gatekeeper that separates those who sip from those who serve. Your bowl is nearly empty now, and the servant who poured it for you earlier steps forward, tilting the jar as if to ask whether you'd like more. You hesitated, partly because your tongue is still negotiating with the chili, partly because you've just realized something important. The nobles may drink cacao like it's a privilege, but they also treat it like something more practical, money. You've heard whispers already, overheard snatches of talk drifting across the courtyard. Someone mentions buying maize, another mutters about paying a worker, and always, in the background, the clink of cacao beans being counted, carried, traded. You blink, wait, cacao as currency. It sounds almost unbelievable, but yes, cacao beans weren't just for drinking, they were literally money. In the Mayan economy, beans had fixed values. A rabbit might cost 10 beans. A simple meal maybe one. If you wanted to impress someone, you could hand over a whole pouch filled with beans, the ancient equivalent of flashing a wallet. You glance into your bowl again, suddenly aware you're drinking liquid coins. Imagine filling a cup with your bank account balance, stirring it with chili, and then gulping it down. It makes you swallow a little slower this time. A noblewoman at the far end of the table laughs softly, telling a story about a man who once hollowed out fake beans from clay and painted them brown to pass them off as real. Fraud. In other words, apparently, it didn't last long in polite society. Cheating with cacao was a crime, a reminder that money has always attracted tricksters. Historians continue to debate just how standardized this system was. Some argue cacao was only a supplement to barter, not a full-blown currency. Others point to records suggesting large-scale trade, where sacks of beans moved like coin purses across markets. The truth, as usual, is fuzzy, but one fact stands solid: cacao carried value in more ways than one. You imagine yourself standing at a Mayan market stall. Someone offers you a woven cloth, and you hand over a handful of beans. You're no longer just a drinker of cacao, you're a spender. In fact, tonight's drink might be the most expensive hot beverage you've ever had. Forget overpriced lattes in modern coffee shops. This is inflation-proof. The nobles around you seem to sense your dawning realization. One of them raises his cup in a small salute, as if to say, "Welcome to the economy." You lift yours back, half amused, half awed, fully aware that every sip you take is worth more than just taste. It's literally worth something in the market outside these walls. By now you've accepted that you're not just drinking a beverage, you're participating in a system of wealth, status, and spice-induced survival drain. But as another bowl makes its way into your hands, someone leans closer and explains in a hushed, reverent tone, "This isn't only money or class, it's divine." The Mayans believed cacao came straight from the gods. Some stories say it was a gift from Kukulkan, the feathered serpent deity, who handed down the sacred tree as both nourishment and symbol. Other myths suggest humans stumbled upon cacao, thanks to the god's generosity or punishment, depending on who you ask. Either way, this wasn't just farming. This was a holy inheritance. The noble speaking to you dips a finger in his cup and touches the rim, almost like a ritual. The gods drink first. He murmurs, then he finally takes a sip himself. You try not to gulp yours too quickly after that. Cacao's divine connection explains why it shows up in ceremonies, offerings, and even burial goods. Archaeologists have found traces of cacao in vessels placed inside tombs, basically a celestial to-go cup for the afterlife. The message is clear. If you're heading to the next world, you better not go thirsty. And again, scholars disagree on the details. Some argue that cacao was reserved only for the gods in high rituals, while others point to evidence that daily consumption was also considered sacred. The debate goes on, but one thing is certain. The Mayans didn't see a split between the sacred and the everyday. Drinking cacao was always both. You glance at the night sky, heavy with stars, and suddenly the whole courtyard feels like part of the ritual. The flickering torches, the painted glyphs on the walls, the jade jewelry glinting like installations, all of it folds into the sense that you're sipping something bigger than yourself. One priest-like figure at the table raises his voice just enough for you to hear. He says cacao carries the essence of blood, not because it looks similar, but because it represents life itself. To drink it is to renew that life, to honor the flow between humans and gods. You nod, a little stunned, holding your bowl carefully with both hands now. The chilly burn in your throat feels different after that explanation. Less like a prank, more like a reminder that power, whether divine or earthly, always comes with heat. You set the bowl down slowly, almost like an offering of your own. Tonight, you're not just drinking history, you're tasting mythology. The night deepens, and just when you think the nobles have finished impressing you with chilly spiked currency drinks from the gods, a new scene unfolds. A group of young women enters the courtyard, carrying bowls with both hands. Their garments are embroidered with bright patterns, and each one balances her steps as though the bowls might spill starlight. You watch as they approach. A young couple seated on woven mats at the edge of the gathering. It doesn't take long to piece it together. This is a wedding ritual. The bride offers her groom a bowl of cacao. Her hands steady, her eyes lowered. The groom accepts, drinks, and hands it back. It's simple, almost understated, but you feel the weight of it immediately. This isn't just refreshment. This is marriage. Sealed not with rings, but with cacao. The symbolism makes sense. Cacao as life, as vitality, as divine gift. What better way to start a marriage than by sharing it? You glance at the other nobles, who nod approvingly, murmuring blessings under their breath. Even here, in a courtyard full of chatter and flickering torches, there's a hush that feels sacred. Later, when the formality lifts, you wander toward the market stalls just beyond the palace walls. Here the mood shifts livelier, noisier, but still centered on cacao. A woman trades a handful of beans for maize tortillas. A man counts out 3 beans carefully before handing over a rabbit. Children watch from the side, eyes wide at the casual exchange of what they probably wish they could eat instead. It strikes you that cacao threads through every layer of Mayan life. In palaces, it sanctifies weddings. In markets, it jingles like coins. You have to expect to see a signboard listing exchange Radisson beans for a turkey, 100 for a slave, 1,000 for a new cloak. Of course, there are no printed menus here, just the shared knowledge of values whispered across trade routes. Historians still debate how much cacao shaped daily life versus ritual life. Some argue it was mostly for elite ceremonies. Others highlight its role in bustling markets. Maybe the truth lies in its dual identity, sacred in temples, practical in stalls. Either way, cacao was everywhere, flowing through marriages, feasts, and Saturday shopping trips alike. You paused by a merchant stall, watching her pour beans from one pouch into another with the same ease you'd expect from someone counting coins. She glances up, offers a smile, and says something you don't quite catch, but you understand the gist. Cacao isn't just traded here, it connects people. In gifts, in vows, in purchases, you step back, cradling your own half-empty bowl, and realize you've stumbled into a world where love, commerce, and divinity all share the same flavor. And yes, it's still spicy. By now, your tongue has made peace with chili. Almost. Each sip still stings, but you're beginning to appreciate the complexity behind the burn. And just when you think you've seen the full range of cacao's power, and noble waves for another tray, this one doesn't hold chili, it holds a sampler of other ingredients, each meant to transform the drink in a slightly different way. First comes maize flour, whisked until the cacao thickens into something halfway between a drink and a porridge. It's hearty, filling, almost like the Mayan version of a protein shake. You take a sip, and suddenly the bitterness softens, cushioned by the grain. It's not sweeter, but it feels more grounding, less like fire in a cup and more like food. Next is honey. Someone dips a carved wooden spoon into a small pot, drizzling a golden thread into the dark liquid. You taste it carefully, and for the first time tonight, there's a hint of the sweetness you've always associated with chocolate. It's subtle, thaw just enough to round the edges. The nobles smile knowingly, as if to say, yes, even bitterness deserves a companion. Then comes flower pollen, sprinkled like yellow dust across the foam. That taste is faintly floral, as though the drink just brushed against a garden. You wouldn't call it delicious in a modern sense, but it has a charm, like drinking spring air mixed with fire. You overhear one priest explaining that each addition changes the meaning as well as the flavor. Chili sharpens the senses, mace strengthens the body, honey soothes the spirit, pollen ties the drink to fertility and renewal. Every bowl becomes a recipe not just for taste, but for symbolism. You realize you're not just customizing a drink, you're customizing an identity. Of course, scholars today still debate exactly which ingredients were most common. Some claim honey was rare and reserved for special occasions. Others insist maize was almost always added, turning cacao into a meal. The arguments rage on in academic journals, while you sit here in the flicker of torchlight, happily becoming a guinea pig for every variation. One noble hands you a cup flavored with both chili and honey. The result is startling sweet at first, fiery at the end, like a polite conversation that suddenly turns into a heated argument. Another offers cacao thickened with maize, and you feel full after just a few sips, as though you've eaten an entire loaf of bread. You glance at your modern-day self in your imagination, sipping store-bought hot chocolate with whipped cream. It suddenly feels boring, too easy. Here, Every mouthful is a story, a philosophy, a gamble. You never know whether the next sip will soothe, sting, or both. And perhaps that's the lesson. For the Mayans, flavor wasn't about comfort, it was about connection. With earth, with gods, with each other. You wipe the foam from your lip, grinning faintly. You're starting to get it. You're getting bolder now, sipping without flinching, even when the chili sneaks up on you. But then you notice something subtle. It isn't just the taste that matters. It's the way people carry the cup. A noble strolls across the courtyard, jade bracelets clinking, holding his foamy cacao high enough for everyone to see. Another sits with perfect posture, lifting her bowl slowly, deliberately, like every movement is staged. It dawns on you, cacao isn't just a drink here. It's a social signal. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of walking into a cafe with the fanciest coffee order, or pulling out a sleek designer water bottle. The cacao cup is a prop, a declaration. If you're holding one, you belong. If you're not, you're outside the circle. You're shifting your seat, suddenly aware that you've been clutching your bowl like it's soup. The noblewoman next to you notices and chuckles softly, adjusting your grip as though she's teaching etiquette. Hold it higher, she says. It shows respect. You obey, and immediately feel 10% more important. Historians argue about how widespread this symbolism was. Some claim cacao was purely ceremonial, while others suggest it had an everyday role in elite households. The truth is likely a mix. Cacao was both a ritual object and a social badge. The difference lay not in the drink itself, but in the eyes watching you hold it. You glance toward the far side of the courtyard, where younger nobles laugh among themselves. One lifts his cup dramatically mid-story, punctuating his joke with a sip. Another waves her bowl like a fan, letting the foam catch the light. You realize that here, cacao is less like food and more like a stage prop in an ongoing play of status. Even the servants seem attuned to the performance. They refill bowls at just the right moment, like stagehands who know the timing of every scene. You think about how odd it would be to see someone slouching, sipping carelessly, spilling a drop. It'd be social suicide. Your bowl suddenly feels heavier, as though the weight of expectations has seeped into the ceramic. You lift it carefully, mimicking the noble's poised movements, hoping no one notices your clumsy imitation. A few approving nods suggest you've done well enough. And just like act, you get it. Cacao was never just cacao. It was fashion. It was theater. It was the Mayan way of saying, yes, I belong here. And yes, I know how to hold my cup. You take another sip, still bitter, still spicy, but now flavored with something else, pride. By now you're sitting a little straighter, holding your bowl with something approaching noble flair. You almost believe you belong until you hear the sound of drums in the distance. The courtyard stirs, and a group of warriors steps in, cloaked in feathers and carrying obsidian blades that glint like dark mirrors. Their arrival shifts the air. Suddenly, cacao isn't just about status or ritual. It's about survival. One of the warriors slams his fist against his chest and downs a bowl of cacao in one gulp. No hesitation, no delicate sips. You blink, realizing this isn't about etiquette anymore. This is fuel. For warriors, cacao was energy in liquid, from calories, stimulation, and perhaps a bit of divine courage poured into one foaming mix. The explanation makes sense. Cacao contains theobromine, a mild stimulant related to caffeine. Pair that with chili, and you've basically got the Mayan version of an energy drink. Forget neon cans from convenience stores. This is the real deal. Thick, bitter, fiery, and powerful. Enough to march for miles. Enough to swing a club without collapsing. Historians are divided here too. Some argue warriors drank cacao before heading to battle. Others claim it was more for their recovery afterward. Maybe both. Archaeological evidence shows cacao residue in vessels found in warrior graves, suggesting it was important enough to take into the afterlife. You imagine a Mayan soldier stepping into battle with a pouch of beans tucked at his belt, like a soldier today with an energy bar. You watch as the warriors pass their bowls around, their eyes fierce, their movement steady. One of them notices your gaze and raises his cup toward you with a grin. "Drink," he says, and you walk farther than your feet can carry. You take a cautious sip in solidarity. The bitterness hits first, then the burn of chili, and suddenly you understand this isn't a leisurely beverage. It's marching fuel, fire in liquid form. The nobles nod approvingly as the warriors finish, the ritual blending seamlessly into the social rhythm of the night. To them, cacao has many lives, sacred for the gods, luxurious for the elite, and energizing for the fighters who protect them all. Your hands tremble slightly from fear, but from the steady buzz running through your body. The drink isn't just warming you anymore, it's propelling you. You glance toward the jungle beyond the walls and almost believe you could run straight into it, never stopping, fueled by nothing more than bitter beans and burning chili. And maybe that was the point. The warriors eventually drift back into the night, drums fading with them, and the courtyard shifts again, quieter now, almost domestic. The nobles recline on woven mats, sipping slowly, and you realize something both familiar and uncanny. This looks a lot like a cafe, not a Starbucks with laptops and Wi-Fi, of course, but the atmosphere is unmistakable. Cups in hand, people lean toward one another, whispering gossip in between sips of cacao. A nobleman gestures animatedly with his bowl, telling a story that makes his friends chuckle. Two women exchange knowing glances, the kind that says they're talking about someone not present. You're half expecting someone to pull out a lute and start strumming background music. Here, chocolate is conversation fuel. It isn't just for weddings, markets, or battlefields. It's for killing time and trading secrets. You can almost imagine these gatherings as the prototypes for modern coffee houses. Drinks served, ideas shared, reputation shaped. Of course, historians still debate how much of this was casual versus ceremonial. Was cacao really used for everyday chats among nobles? Or are we projecting our own cafe culture backward? Some argue cacao was too precious for such informality. Others point to depictions in murals that show nobles lounging with bowls in hand, suggesting it wasn't always solemn. Either way, the resemblance is hard to ignore. You lean in, catching a scrap of conversation, something about land disputes, something about a neighbor's daughter marrying beneath her station. Nothing earth-shattering, but the kind of everyday talk that keeps society humming, and all of it punctuated by sips of bitter, spicy cacao. The noble next to you laughs, covering his mouth with one elegant hand. He turns and explains, "Chocolate makes tongues looser." You grin. He's not wrong. Even your own thoughts feel more fluid after a few bowls. The combination of caffeine-like theobromine and chili heat has you alert, buzzing gently, almost chatty. You take another sip, glance at the firelight flickering on the courtyard walls, and realize you've stumbled into a social engine, not just a drink, but an atmosphere, a reason to gather, to linger, to share words you might not otherwise say. It makes you wonder how many alliances, marriages, rivalries, or rebellions were born in conversations over cacao. Historians may never know for sure, But tonight you see the possibility clearly, and you can't help but smile. Centuries later, people will still sit in cafes, mugs in hand, swapping stories, different drink, same ritual. The courtyard hushes suddenly, like someone dimmed the world's volume knob. A group of men in white cotton robes steps forward, each carrying a bowl not for drinking, but for pouring. Their movements are deliberate, ceremonial, as if every step is a line in a sacred script. You realize you're about to see cacao in its most solemn form. Ritual. They approach a stone altar at the edge of the courtyard. The surface is worn, carved with glyphs that look like vines twisting toward the sky. One priest raises his bowl and tilts it slowly, letting the thick liquid cascade over the altar's surface. The cacao runs down the grooves, dripping onto the ground with a sound that somehow feels louder than the drums earlier. This is life, one priest intones, voice steady. It flows between us and the gods. You watch as more cacao is poured, some splashed deliberately onto burning coals, releasing a smoky, bitter scent into the night air. It curls upward like an offering of steam, as though the gods might sip it from the sky. Here's the thing. Historians know cacao was tied to sacrifice and offerings, but the specifics are still debated. Some argue it replaced blood in certain rituals, standing in symbolically. Others believe it was offered alongside blood, amplifying its sacred weight. The truth likely shifted from city to city, ceremony to ceremony, but the pattern remains. Cacao wasn't just consumed, it was given back. A priest dips his fingers into the bowl and flicks droplets onto the gathered nobles, almost like holy water. One lands on your arm, sticky, bitter, fragrant. You glance at it, unsure whether to wipe it away or let it dry. Around you, the nobles close their eyes, accepting the blessing without flinching. You imitate them, trying not to look too much like the outsider you are. The symbolism is clear. Cacao connects human life to divine cycles. Its bitterness, its heat, its foam, they all echo the messiness of existence. Drinking it nourishes, offering it sanctifies, to sides of the same beam. The fire crackles, and the night feels denser, charged. You realize that for the Mayans, cacao wasn't about indulgence or comfort, it was about connection. To drink it casually was status. To drink it for strength was power. But to pour it away was devotion. And as you watch the final bowl emptied onto the stone, you feel it to that strange, quiet weight of sharing a ritual that has outlived its people, its temples, its empire. What remains is the taste, bitter, spicy, eternal. The ritual leaves the courtyard quieter than before, the air heavy with smoke and meaning. But then, just as you're adjusting to the weight of it all, a new group appears at the gates, men in strange clothes, their beards long, their armor shining even in the torchlight. You recognize them immediately, not Mayan nobles, but Spanish conquistadors. They're being offered bowls of cacao as a gesture of welcome. You watch closely, curious about what happens when one world's sacred drink collides with another's appetite. A Spaniard lifts the cup, sniffs, and takes a sip. His face twists instantly, as if someone slipped him spoiled soup. He sputters, wipes his mouth, and mutters something sharp in Castilian. His companions laugh, shaking their heads. Clearly, this bitter water is not winning hearts tonight. And you get it. To Europeans, accustomed to sweet wines and honeyed pastries, this concoction must have tasted like punishment. Bitter, spicy, foamy, Unsweetened, it was everything their palates didn't expect. Some accounts even suggest they found it disgusting, good only for the savages who drank it. But here's the twist. Someone had the bright idea to add sugar. Cane sugar, brought from the old world, was stirred into the cacao. Suddenly, everything changed. What was once bitter water became chocolate in the European. Sin sweeter, softer, almost pleasant. Historians argue about exactly when and where this transformation happened. But by the late 16th century, cacao was already making its way into Spanish courts, dressed up with sugar, cinnamon, and milk. You imagine the nobles watching this shift with mixed feelings. Their sacred drink, altered beyond recognition, reshaped for foreign tongues, a little like watching your grandmother's recipe turned into a fast food menu item still familiar, yet completely different. And scholars debate the consequences to this day. Some say cacao lost its spiritual edge in Europe, reduced to a luxury good for aristocrats. Others argue it gained new life, spreading across continents, evolving into the chocolate you know now. Either way, the Spanish misinterpretation ensured cacao would never be the same again. Back in the courtyard, the Spaniards sipped their sweetened version, nodding approvingly at last. You glance at your own bowl, still bitter, still fiery, and suddenly it feels like you're holding the original, unedited manuscript of a story the rest of the world would only ever read in translation. You take a slow sip, tasting both defiance and continuity. The Mayan version isn't easy, isn't gentle, but is the one that remembers. The Spaniards eventually leave, their ships waiting to carry cacao seeds and the new sugary version of the drink across the ocean. The courtyard quiets again, and you're left with your original bowl. You swirl the liquid, thinking about how the Mayans' bitter water was about to travel the world, forever altered. But before it does, you're reminded of something closer to home, echoes that still linger today. Because if you've ever sipped Mexican hot, chocolate-rich, dark, faintly spiced, you've already tasted a ghost of this ancient tradition. In modern kitchens, families still whisk cacao with wooden tools called molineros, spinning foam into the drink the same way the Mayans once poured it from vessel to vessel. A chili, still there, if you know the right recipe. The sweetness, a European twist that stuck, but one that never fully erased the fire. You think of a winter market in Osaka, where stalls sell thick, spiced chocolate drinks with cinnamon and chili. Children sip them happily, unaware they're drinking something with roots older than empires. You picture street vendors pouring chocolate into mugs, the foam rising, the smell of cacao filling the air, mingling with roasted corn and fried masa. Suddenly, the Mayan courtyard doesn't feel so far away. Historians note that traditions evolve, but rarely disappear entirely. Some argue the modern chili chocolate drinks are deliberate continuations of Mayan recipes. Others say they're coincidences, culinary revivals shaped by nostalgia. Either way, the resemblance is uncanny. What you drank under torchlight centuries ago still whispers through kitchens today. You lift your bowl again, tasting with fresh awareness. The bitterness still clings to your tongue, but now you notice subtler flavors to it: smoke from the fire, earthy tones from the ground maize, even a faint floral note that makes you think of modern vanilla. Maybe you're imagining it, or maybe history really is a flavor, carried forward in ways we barely recognize. A noble across the table notices your thoughtful look. The drink travels. He says softly, almost like a prophecy, but it always remembers where it came from. You nod, finishing the last sip. He's right. Chocolate today may be sweet, wrapped in foil, stuffed into candy bars, but beneath all that sugar still lies bitterness. still lies spice, still lies the memory of a world where every bowl was sacred, social, and fiery, and you can't help but smile. Somewhere, centuries later, someone will still wrinkle their nose at chili and chocolate, and someone else will sip it slowly, savoring the burn, and feel the Mayans nodding in approval. The courtyard is quiet again. The fire burned low, shadows stretching long across the stone walls. You cradle your nearly empty bowl, the foam clinging stubbornly to the sides. Around you, nobles lean back in contentment, as if the night has offered them everything it was meant to. Ritual, gossip, energy, blessing. For you, it feels like the closing of a circle. You think back on every sipho it sung, how it soothed, how it carried meanings far beyond taste. Cacao as privilege, as money, as divine gift, as wedding vow, as warrior's fuel. Each chapter of the drink layered on top of the last, until the bitterness in your mouth feels inseparable from the story of a people. And yet, one question still hangs in the air. Why? Why did the Mayan nobles cherish something so bitter, so fiery, so difficult for outsiders to love? Historians today still argue about the answer. Some say it was the stimulating effect, the way cacao sharpened the senses. Others say it was symbolic, a drink that tied them to gods and ancestors. Still others believe it was simply fashion, a status marker that became tradition. The truth, maybe all of them, or maybe none. History has a habit of hiding its reasons, letting us sip only the foam at the top, while the deeper meaning sinks out of reach. You glance into your bowl one last time, and for a moment you think you see more than a drink. You see value, belief, ritual, laughter, arguments, and offerings, all swirling together, a civilization condensed into liquid form. The noble beside you raises his bowl in a final salute. You mimic the gesture, drinking the last drop. It burns, bitter and fiery as ever, and you smile through the sting. You understand now. This wasn't about comfort, it was about connection. To sip chocolate with chili was to sip the Mayan world itself. And as the night air grows cooler, you lie back on the woven mat, listening to the frogs beyond the walls, your body warm with the lingering fire. Somewhere in the dark, history is still laughing softly, still whispering through every grain of cacao, every spark of chili. The courtyard fades, the fire dims, and the voices of the nobles soften, until they're nothing more than background murmurs. You're still lying there, bowl empty, lips tingling faintly from the last trace of chili, but the heat has melted into calm now, a gentle warmth threading through your body. The night air feels heavier, as lower, as though even the stars have agreed to rest. Your eyes close without you meaning to, lids drifting down like the wings of tired birds. The weight of history lingers in your chest, but it's no longer sharp or urgent. It's like a lullaby made of stories, bitterness turned into rhythm, spice turned into comfort. The Mayan world slips into dream to shape. Feathered headdresses become clouds, torches flicker into fireflies, and the taste of cacao fades into something quieter, sweeter, almost like memory itself. Breathe in, breathe out. The jungle hum is steady, the frogs and crickets singing you down the last steps of wakefulness. You're not holding a bowl anymore. You're holding stillness. You're not sipping fire. You're sipping sleep. And maybe that's the real secret. The Mayans knew all along that even the most complex, bitter, fiery parts of life can, in the end, settle into peace. So let go. The story is finished. The night is yours. Drift, rest, dream,